So we were reviewing a proof of concept readout with a wholesale lawn care distributor. And they had made a huge bet with their CRM. This was obviously a board level decision, and they wanted this CRM to be, the backbone of their corporate infrastructure, especially as it pertains to the acquisition of customers and the service of those customers. And we were looking at the various workflows, and right off the bat, this notion of the observed truth versus the stated truth occupied almost 3/4 of the meeting. They were simply incredulous to see how many swivel chairs existed in their organization, heretofore absolutely, never devised, never designed, never known. And so one of these swivel chairs occurred between a distribution or a dispatch app where users would go in and tell the truck where to go, with what cargo, what route to take, how long it was going to take. And they were swiveling back and forth between Salesforce and the dispatch app. And so that behavior was known, but there was a third-party app in the mix, and it was mapping software. Whether it was Google in this case, I don't think it's really pertinent to the story, but they saw their users swiveling between Salesforce, the dispatch app, and this mapping software over and over again, and taking quite a long time, and then going and hard coding, if you will, the data in the dispatch app about the trip or the delivery that was about to take place. And it troubled one of the users or one of the administrators so bad, and he was so perplexed, he left the meeting and didn't return until the end. And what he did is he went to the dispatch app and figured out that they hadn't updated the mapping software in like 10 years. And so the data became stale, the addresses weren't available, they weren't trusted, the traffic overlay, they didn't trust. And literally he updated it on the spot, came in, said, don't worry about that one. Let's put out a message about how we improved this workflow so that you don't have to go to third-party mapping software. You can actually get it right and accurate in the application. This is one just practical and tactical use case that was causing an immense amount of headache in the organization. The other was in their CRM, they had designed this workflow that made it very ambiguous on how to proceed to the next step. I called it the hover button. And why is it the hover button? We watched at least 15 users through session replays make it to this step in the workflow, hover over the button, and then ultimately choose something else. Now, why just 15? Well, because we looked at the session summaries, and it said this month, 575 people have done that exact same thing. And they just realized that they needed to be more descriptive and make it clearer that, hey, yes, to move forward, click here, and to proceed with the workflow. But the amount of time wasted going back and forth, doing rework over this one button was absolutely astonishing. Furthermore, upon logging into their CRM, they had spent months creating the perfect account executive dashboards. It was designed to save them time. It showed them where they were against their number. It showed them they only had 4 or 5 accounts each. So it had hot links to their exact accounts, and then a list of kind of the most common actions. And just through simple observation, session replays, and session summaries, they figured out that 99% of their users avoided the dashboard altogether, went right to the search button, and literally searched for what was right there in front of them. So they realized that they needed to, update their enablement, their onboarding, and even publish just a, hey, did you know, kind of useful information, to try and save the users some time, because they just, for whatever reason, were unaware that what they were searching for was right there in front of them to begin with. So it's these kinds of micro stories on the ground that coalesce and aggregate into something very meaningful when you're talking about the consumption of time inside of a workflow.
I've noticed recently with a particular airline that we work with, and we deployed Workforce on a fleet of their devices across their enterprise, and discovered that there is a couple workflows that occur maybe only a couple times a year. It's very far few between, maybe once every 6 months, once every 12. And generally there are different people doing these workflows year after year. So it's never really the same person doing the same thing every year. So they don't, and even if it is, they don't really remember what they did 12 months ago in order to complete that workflow. And the folks working in these offices, they span over several countries, maybe time zones, different offices, the whole thing. And Workforce was able to surface that and say, hey, you have the same thing happening every 6 months or every 12 months, and it's taking them just as long the second time to do this. It's a very repetitive task, and they're not getting any faster at it, even though they're doing it maybe once every year. So we were able to identify that, and then obviously every major, I think, enterprise out there right now has some AI department that everyone's trying to build agents right now, us included, right? So it's like we are working with their AI team in building building like a workflow automation tool or agent, essentially to automate some of these practices. Imagine being able to no longer spend an 8-hour workday trying to figure out what you did a year ago, and being able to turn that into a workflow that you can then automate and pass off to AI. It unlocks so many opportunities and potential, but that's kind of like a use case that we're actually working through right now.
I'll put a tack on that. Several companies we're working with, and Josh, you hit the nail on the head, right? Once you can understand your workflows, catalog them, classify them, organize them into manageable chunks, and then understand where those friction points are, right? The urge is always towards optimization, as it probably should be. But the final frontier, right, the logical conclusion of, workflows that lend themselves to such is automation. And lots of our customers are cutting Workforce on because agentic AI needs what to truly operate at scale and reliability. It needs mountains of data. And who has that data? It's Workforce. And whereas without Workforce, right, you kick off an agentic AI initiative, the first question that always arises is, well, what workflow shall we do? And it's back to the anecdotal, the tribal, the unmapped, right? Literally, they'll go to marketing. Hey, what workflows do you have? Any worth automating? They go to finance. They go to operations. They go to sales. Sales is generally vocal about what they want. But even identifying what would lend itself to automation can be a months-long task without, complete visibility, so that you can get to the scoring of which ones make sense. And so what we're seeing is customers going forward with Workforce just to get the observation and the data layer complete, so that when they do identify their workflows, they've got more data and more examples of that workflow upon which to teach their agentic AI agents what to do. And then when these agentic AI capabilities get in market, right, who's going to observe them? Who's going to monitor and supervise them? Who's going to secure them? Who's going to make sure that they're actually fulfilling the promise that was of their creation and origin story in the first place? So that's probably the most exciting use case for Workforce that we have today, is while we don't make here at FullStory agentic AI agents, we simply help companies make them better and faster than they otherwise could.
Just on that point, without the actual granular data that Workforce can provide companies on, user behavior, on employee behavior across these tools, they might be able to identify, here are the top few workflows and process that we have people go through on a regular basis, and we want to automate that. We want these AI agents to go ahead and take over this thing that's very manual, very repetitive, to make things more efficient, right? But just because you have step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mapped out doesn't mean that, one, it's the actual process that the employees go through. Oftentimes, or more often than not, it's really not as simple as 1 through 5 in order. Sometimes you're jumping back and forth. Sometimes there's a tool that is completely out of the process that you thought is actually involved. And so without the more granular data, you're not going to feed those AI systems the right information to then go out and act and automate without the employee really guiding and having to correct and fine tune and manually adjust things along the way. It's also really important to know, we have all this conversation around agentic AI and all these kind of, research development teams are really starting to work on what are we going to do with AI at our company. We know it's important. We know we want to use it to our advantage to be more productive and efficient. They're looking at a workflow, an end-to-end workflow that might be massive, span multiple tools, might even exchange hands. In the case of, for example, like a support ticket or a support case might get passed off to multiple internal people and teams. With Workforce, you're able to even get down to the more granular, what are the steps within tool A? What are the steps that person A is taking versus person B across all those systems? So you can even get those little micro process like moments, those micro workflows within the larger process that you're looking at. And then that's where you could start with involving AI to actually automate even just those more micro interactions, those micro repetitive tasks that build up that larger process and getting that workflow done. And so it's important that Workforce can actually enable, step 1 of that journey that a company is taking into deploying these AI agents to make their entire company more productive.